Okay, so let's get some practice with generics. Generics is an extremely complicated topic in Java, and trust me, you're going to have a lot of opportunity to work with generics over the course of your career. What we're going to look at specifically is how to compare generic types. We're going to take a look at the comparable interface that is provided by the Java SDK. This is an important interface because a lot of other things hook into this interface and rely on it to compare unknown objects. For example, comparing strings is fairly straightforward, right? We can compare alphabetically. You can compare, by capitalization. We can compare by length. But what about more of a abstract class that represents like a person and a student in a university, or a part on an engine? It may not be that straightforward as to how to compare two things. Additionally, you may need to do a comparison on several properties of the object, right? And then rank them. So we're going to go jump in and we're going to write a really small, simple class that implements the comparable interface, and then write some code to practice with it. So without further ado, let's jump into the code. Okay, so we're going to implement the comparable interface. The comparable interface, as you can see, is implemented by a whole ton of classes. That's because a lot of stuff hooks in to the comparable interface. The comparable interface defines a ordering of one class to another. It just has one method, compare to, right? So compare this object with a specified object for order. Okay, and then this is defining what compare to will do, right? So it returns less than 0, equal to 0, or greater than 0 to define, whether or not this object falls before, equal, or after some other object. It is a extremely powerful interface, and you can see that it is used so that lists and arrays of objects that implement this interface can be sorted automatically by collections.sort, which is pretty cool. So we can actually even go look at, so we can search here, string. So you can see that the string class implements comparable. So now you know how strings can compare themselves. They implement comparable. So you use a string and everything seems to work because it implements this interface, which is pretty cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to implement this interface. We have an interface named course, and course extends comparable. Now, it is kind of confusing in this context, right? Because extends is usually meant to indicate we're extending another class. But in this case, if we're extending an interface, that it would be extends, not implements. It is kind of confusing. It seems backwards, but that's just the way the Java language is. Whenever you have an interface, you use the extends keyword if you want the interface to implement another interface, because the comparable is an interface, right? So we can actually have an interface extend an interface, which is pretty cool. So we have course extends comparable, and we want to compare a course. And these are just the getters and setters. We have get department, set department, get number, set number. We want to implement that. We want to implement that in my course. I'm not going to show that because obviously that's the solution. That's what you've got to write. And then we have our course testing, which we can use to test our implementation. So before we go look at the tests I wrote, let's just go back and look at what we need to do. Right, so we have complete the my course class, right, which implements the course interface. And we want to create our unit tests and then do input-output testing in app.java. Okay, so let's go look at the course testing. So the testing on this is pretty straightforward, because once we implement the interface, implement my course, we can just go ahead and create new courses and then just compare them. So in our case, course, and then 1, 2, we defined by the README. Great. So this actually defines what we need to. This defines this string right here, or sorry, this task 1 defines how we compare one course to another, like what it means. All right. So this test asserts test equals, test of department equals, test num equals, test department less, test department greater, and test num greater, and then test num less. And the department is the string, and the number is ones, or the number is the course number. So think of this if we were in for Boise State, it would be, if this class, it would be 221. Or it would be a computer science 2, right? That would be the name of the course. Then the number would be 221, right? So that's kind of what that's what this all means. In fact, one cool thing is we can actually do that. Let's actually write a new test to test our Boise State course numbers. So test public void test BSU, right? And I'm going to say course 121, course 121 equals new my course, and I'm going to say computer science 1, and the number is 121. And then I'm going to say course 221 equals new my course, computer science 2. And I'm going to say 221. Now, assuming that everything works, we should be able to say assert equals, oops, what am I doing here? Assert equals, and then I want to say O121 dot compare to O221, and 121 should be less, so I want to say -1. Now I can go through and I could open up my test bench. Here's a new test that we just run, or just authored, and let's go ahead and run that. And it passes, okay? Which means that the opposite should be true as well. So assert equals O221 dot compare to O121. So that should be greater, right? And we should run the test. That's good. Now let's test equals, right? So assert equals O121 dot compare to O121. So we'll compare it to itself, right? So that should definitely be equal, right? And let's go ahead and run that. And we still pass, so that's good. So that is our tests that we ran and we wrote, and that's pretty much it. It's a fairly straightforward, and that's the nice thing about generics is once you kind of get the foundation in, it makes it pretty easy to update and add more stuff to it makes it pretty seamless to get your class implemented. Then what we want to do is we want to do input-output testing. So we have the file app.java. You have to give it, it's given to you to be completed. What we want to do is we want to be able to input a series of numbers like this, and we want to output the courses sorted. So you see here that I have C1, C2, A5, A2, so that's out of order, and then B0, right? So A should be first, B, and C. And you can see here in my sorted output, I have A, B, C, and everything, and the numbers are 2, 5, 0, 1, 2. So everything is looking good. So that is pretty much it. So it's a fairly straightforward lab. The goal is to demonstrate how we can compare objects and implement a generic comparable interface. So that should get you started. We went over the testing and showed you the test. So that should help you out. So happy hacking.